Hi, Paul.
Hi, Lucy. Okay, so what we want to do is review. Let me give you the top level. You know the horizontal navigation for those buttons. You know the vertical gives us the capabilities to navigate other parts of CMS based on the role that we're given. We reviewed the messaging. What I want to take now is let's take what we know now and let's take a look at the case process and go over the design philosophy of that. I know you have some questions, but I think you're going to be really interested in seeing this. Remember, you and I just reviewed that your paper processes at the conference are, and correct me if I make a mistake, but essentially you have a hotline and you take an initial log of the client. You then work up a document that essentially serves as an assignment document. That's passed on to a caseworker who eventually creates a case and does the home visit, and then that case record is stored in a physical archive. Do I have those 4 steps essentially correct?
Essentially, they're correct. At the hotline, you want to keep a running log of the calls that are coming through. So
okay.
You know, and the disposition of that call.
Okay, and the disposition of the call. Sometimes do the calls filter out based on who takes the original call? Do you rotate that by week, or give me an idea of who takes that original call?
The way we're organized in our conferences, we have 3 teams. Each team has a team captain. The team captain will take the hotline calls for a week. It's the team captain that will assign the case to a member or 2 members. Once the case is assigned, it is up to those 2 members to talk to the client and make a home visit as appropriate. It is during that time that the caseworkers will then fill out an intake form with information regarding the client.
So once the case is assigned to the caseworker fills out a preliminary documentation as to what they're preparing for the visit. Is that correct?
Well, no. That we have a form that they're going to collect information about the client. When they go on that home visit or if they do it by the phone, they're going to collect information about that client, about the family, who are the family members or ages, other financial information that we want to understand, and then what the need of the client is and exactly what they need.
Interesting. Okay. So they will, on the phone, is that required before they do the home visit, or just sometimes they do the home visit without that information? How does that quite work?
Usually you collect that information during the home visit.
Yes. Okay. I just wanted to be clear. Okay. Yep. I understand. So let's look at the CMS process. I'll just use a sample process. There are a couple that you could implement. There's actually a couple that you could implement based on the way your conference is designed, but I won't go into those on this interaction. We'll just give you a high-level view and get through these kind of quickly.
Okay,
so let me show you the case intake, and you might find this interesting. Now, case intake is its actual flow. So it's a multi-step process. Let me use the client to open up this work task that is what we call client inquiry. Client inquiry, when your database gets built up large enough, as multiple conferences use the system in the diocese, and as your conference uses the system, you're going to be able to detect if a client is already in your database.
That's real.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's all good. I mean, because that's one of the first things. Well, even when the call comes in, that we want to understand if that client has come to our conference or any other conference beforehand.
Right.
And, yeah, so that's good.
Yeah. it's going to detect an existing client. It's going to understand whether or not a household member is come in. It's going to understand it's going to help you understand if a case is currently open with that particular person who came in.
That's real good.
And it's also going to, it also have a flag. If there's a red flag, you'd be able to understand if that client is under any kind of condition that the conference set for them. And, of course, it's going to be able to find out if you spread the system across the diocese, it'll know if the client inquiry will know if the client's been assisted by another conference before.
Yeah.
So
that's let me ask you this, Paul. What happens sometimes, you have the relationships established. For example, what happens many times is, or sometimes, is different members of the same family will call in, but they come in different names, but they're members of the same family.
yes. So if the previous caseworker had identified those household members within the case record that they had accomplished before, that person, if you type their first name and last name, and if you use other identifying characteristics, date of birth, social security number, even the cell phone number, it will, and the address, it will detect if that person who just walked in shares the address, shares the cell phone number, or in fact is a household member within another client's record.
That's excellent. Okay. Yeah, because we just had that happen. We've had that happen several times.
Yeah. We had one one diocese in the Midwest refer to clients who come in and sending different members of the family. They refer to them as frequent flyers.
Exactly.
So.
And sometimes that's very legitimate, but we need to know that ahead of time.
Okay. Now, what's also important to understand, any client interaction we have, the more data we can get on the front end, the better. Obviously, in discerning what the status of this potential client is assisted by the density of the data we can collect. And what we learned in 3 years of implementing this solution for St. Vincent de Paul is that the first and last name, date of birth, 5 digits of the Social Security number, the phone numbers, the address, they are very important in understanding the client.
Yes.
And if we can get all of those pieces of information, CMS will run a matching routine to find cell phone numbers that match independently, addresses that match, and it'll bring up all the clients that match those very quickly. So if somebody gave you a different last name that's in their household record, but they gave you the identical cell phone number, CMS will pull that cell phone record tagged item up. Okay?
Okay.
So let me give you a sample so you can see how the flow works. I'm going to type in.
So this is the inquiry function. Okay.
That's correct. And you will see the client profile be saved as it goes through. So the client profile information that you're filling out is actually going to be pre-staged for the caseworker. So the caseworker receives the assignment. It's going to have all of the data set that you collected in the inquiry process, in what we call client intake process. It'll collect it all. We say it's the intake process, and client inquiry is one of the key couple first steps of that client intake process.
I can see this working when the person manning the hotline takes the calls, they can check very quickly by using this function whether that client has called in before.
That's right.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, this is a.
So let me just do a relatively naive search on. I'll use John Workflow as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know John is male. Okay. I don't know his marital status. I don't know what church. Let's just say this is not the way to do it, but let's just say I had a limited amount of information, and I didn't fill out any of the rest of this information.
Usually what we ask them to leave is their name, their phone number, their address. Those are key things that we'll have ahead of time.
Okay, so we'll match on first and last name, we'll match on address, we'll match on phone, and it will look independently of those matches and pull them out. Let's see if there's a John Workflow in the system, just on the last name. So what it does is, you can see it's client identification step 1 of 1. Since we only had a last name, we did not have a social security number, a cell phone, or an address, we only ran one procedure to find John Workflow. Okay? And if we had the phone number, if we had the date of birth, if we had social security number and address, it would run 4 identification routines. So it would search the database and try and link to a lot of records. But I'm trying to keep this brief so that I'll walk you through it, and I can go back with a different example later. But what's happening here is you see the results. It has indeed found a John Workflow that is an existing client. It's also found first name wife, and it's listed it in gray. She has the same last name. So it'll bring up both, but it'll rank the client first, and it'll list household members in gray that match a criteria or more criteria of the client identification information you put in.
In this case, you're just looking at the last name.
That's right. That's right. So I'm keeping it very simple so that you understand the structure.
Sure,
but again, let's go back to client profile. If we put in phone numbers and we put in address and we put in date of birth, it's going to rank those by priority and search them, and you will see a client identification step 1 of 4. And then you press next, and it will quickly look for other matches. And you can elect to take the match that you see at any time by clicking on it. Okay, so if you went, go ahead.
So it's depending on what fields you enter, it's going to do an inquiry on all those fields to find a match on any one of those fields?
Yes. There are 5 key fields that it searches on. And this is our product manager and the original designer, one of the original executive directors at one of the dioceses that we originally worked with, was both our side and their side were adamant about using very good techniques at the front end because they were dealing with 275,000 clients they already had in their diocese from a couple of years or several years of using another system. So this is probably it is the largest or one of the key benefits of using CMS, and it happens right at the front of the process. I know we're taking a lot of time to describe this, but we want you to fully absorb the dimensions of client identification. It's going to give it an inquiry number. So if you stopped this inquiry because you had another phone call or you broke off, this inquiry number would maintain itself, and you could search the system and find that inquiry, and the inquiries will be listed in the inquiry work list. They'll also be listed in your assigned cases whereby you wouldn't have a caseworker yet assigned to this inquiry, but since you're doing the inquiry, you're an intake person, or you could be a caseworker doing the inquiry, it'll show up in your work list as incomplete yet. Okay? So now look at, this is also illustrative of what CMS does. Okay? Every step in CMS, whether you're processing a check, or whether you're processing an inquiry, or whether you're processing a case, it's going to take you through a stepwise process so that you do the data entry appropriately.
Okay.
And it's also going to track things. So if you leave a check request, or if you leave casework, or you leave an intake partially complete, CMS does not lose that work. It maintains it for you.
Good.
Okay. So look at this workflow, and you can see that I'm able to look at the inquiry number, the client potentially, and if I want to accept this client, okay, I can look at John Workflow. I can click on it, and I can see the prior status of this client is active. If I want to look at past assistance, I can click on that, see if there's any past assistance. We have them, and that's the past assistance record. It's not going to go across diocesan territory.
Okay.
So they'd be in the same diocese. Okay. But here's the client, and we're going to say, yeah, this is the client. So we're going to select this client. Right? We picked them from the list that the CMS profile gave us. Here's the intake profile. Remember, we only used first and last name and gender identification, yet it still found them. Okay?
Right.
But what we want to do is we want to use the date of birth. We want to use the Social Security number, right? We want to use the cell phone number. And we want to use the address. Okay?
Okay.
So if we did do that, okay, if we use the DOB, which is the date of birth, if we had the ability to use the last 5 digits of the Social Security number, and if we had the cell phone number, we should go ahead and use it at the front end of the inquiry process. All right? And I'll show you how that change of dimensions, where we have more data to search the client, it won't find a different client because we'll see the effect. Okay, so I'm going to go back. Okay, and I'm gonna reset the workflow by pressing previous. This is just for example's sake.
Okay.
And I'm going to go into my profile. Okay. And I'm going to say, okay, I know the Social Security number now. Okay?
Right.
63542 are the last digits. I know the date of birth. Excuse me. The date of birth is the 5th of October in 1945. Okay?
Okay.
And I know the cell phone number. Okay? And the cell phone number is okay. Now, you see how when the workflow is now set up the way it would be at the beginning. There's no client inquiry yet, and there's one last thing. Go ahead.
No, and I noticed you're on the client inquiry function now.
That's where I was before. I reset it for the purposes of reviewing how a thorough case intake would work, where we have all the information, or as much information as can be searched by. Now I'll press next. And you see now it's running a client inquiry. Remember, it only did the one?
Uh-huh.
Now it starts with the strongest association, the cell phone number. See that? And it picks up that John workflow is associated with that cell phone number throughout the whole database, hundreds of thousands of records. Okay. So I could pick John from there. But let's go next and see. It'll search on if this was John and he showed up. That's fine. We could select him. But let's have it search on the next dimension because it's searching on one of 5 dimensions. The first one was the address. Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry. The first one was the phone number because that's the most specific one and the most readily available. Now it's going to search on address.
Address. There
and
you
look
go.
Look at all the people. Look at all the people that show up at that address.
Exactly. Now you can. That's one can be very valuable to understand.
And there are the ones in gray, of course, are the members of the household who may come in with that address and not be associated with the particular or be associated with a particular client. So they came in and they gave their name instead of John Workflow. The wife came in and gave you her name. You'd be able to find her. Now we're on the second dimension, which was address. Let's see what the third dimension brings us. It brings up date of birth, which is only specific to John. And again, you would have picked John earlier in the workflow, but what we're demonstrating is all these dimensions that it can quickly search on. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
So we went phone number, then we rank search by address. Now we're rank searching by date of birth. The next thing it's going to search on, which is the 4th most powerful dimension to find the client, is their Social Security number. You see John shows up again. Okay?
Right.
So the more data we can put in, the more dimensions it will search by. And that's what you want because it only takes seconds. 2 seconds, 3 seconds each one.
I just noticed something, an address that I just want to point out. An address can be many times most of these people live in apartments. So
yes.
If you're going by address and you don't have the apartment number, you could get all the people in that apartment complex that have come.
That happens so frequently.
So if there could be
first,
yeah.
Yep. And the first. Yes. It's going to search. The dimensions of it are. It's going to search on the first address line, and again, you're supposed to have other dimensions of the client's profile to balance that out as well, so that you use multiple dimensions. What you have is caseworkers and intake individuals will transcribe certain amounts of the address.
Sure.
It's always going to be somewhat variable. So to really pull down in granular, you can we didn't put IBM Watson behind the search. If you want that, that's another $500,000, but I'm just teasing. Anyway, you get the picture. You get the picture. This is how the Vincentian designed it.
Yes.
They were very careful about this. This is about 95% of the intake process. Let's be careful about the client identification. What's next? Well, so I could get to the third step or the second step. I could select him at any of these steps in client identification. But let me select him as the client I want to agree is the person who's come in. I have the intake profile here of all the information I put in. Again, you've already seen this, but that's the past assistance associated with this client. So I'm going to go ahead and pick them. There's their current match there. and their intake profile. This current match comes from their existing record set that I selected. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select John. I detected him. I'm going to keep him. And he's got a lot of open cases. But because this is a demo.
It's also showing a closed, which is good. That's what I was trying to. Okay, so you see if he had, like we might have a family that, or they may come 2 or 3 times in the year, but it's very important to know that.
That's correct.
And it says, okay, this is good.
Right, and it's gonna give you the portfolio, the client profile. The client profile is the one you have for them based on what you selected. This is very complex. Normally, you don't have to go through this subroutine, but I'm showing it to you just so you can see the kind of the depth that CMS has.
Yeah. Good.
Then there's the client identification, which is the step we're in, and then if you want to look at any open cases they currently have, and close this inquiry because they have 2 open cases. You know, I don't want to serve this person because they've got 2 open cases already.
And
right?
then he has the name of who's the caseworker assigned?
That's correct. And what the nature of the request was.
Yeah, that's really good. That's very helpful.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and create a new case for this client. Even though they have a couple of open ones. So it continues with the workflow. And it gives me who was in the last case that this client had. We inherit all of the information that the previous caseworker had for the household. Okay?
In the household, okay.
So I did my open case review. I did my client identification. I filled out my client profile. Past assistance is always available to me. Okay?
Excellent,
And then I'm going to, again, this is very dense. Normally, you're just going to zip through this little workflow. The client doesn't have a history. They don't have any open cases. You're creating a new client. But I demonstrate this client inquiry process with an existing client, with all of their data fields to find them, with the fact they had a couple of open cases, just so you could see the absolute worst conditions that you would experience, and that how CMS would then manage them for you. Okay? So we're moving from the left to the right. We'll fill out the household information. And then for this particular client intake, CMS requires you to put at least one request. Okay? The date of the request is today. Time of the request is now, Eastern Time. And I'm going to put in that they needed food and groceries. And they need, say, $200 worth of food. And I want to tell the caseworker that they've got when they go to the address, the house is, the house is in disrepair. These are little notes that I can attach with the request. Importantly, the request will always be kept with the case, so you'll always know when they called in. This information that you're doing in intake is going to be shuttled into the case record.
So you're using the category of other to put in a comment?
Yes, I just used other to put in a comment.
Okay. Additional comments, yeah.
Yeah, and these match with the national reporting.
Sure, I noticed that. Those are the categories that you put in.
Yeah, and again, this is just summary. This is actually not the casework. It's just this intake process where you're doing the courtesy work for the caseworker to give them information about this particular client and set them up for success on the home visit.
Let me ask you just a quick question. Can those categories be modified?
They're standard, but
Okay.
they're standard for intake, and the categories are, and subcategories of assistance are far broader. So when the caseworker gets into adding assistance, they pick from a very deep catalog of assistance.
Okay.
And then that assistance is then automatically mapped to a financial type, so that when the treasurer approves the check request, it's generated from an assistance profile in the case. Mm-hmm. So they get the case, you profile the food, the utility bill, whatever specific assistance they need that requires one or more checks. You pick a catalog, and that catalog can be reported upon. So you can pick a particular catalog item and report on that for a month, etc. It's all structured, so that the reporting just flows straight from the interactions that the caseworker or the treasurer have. It's all structured, and it all reports up to the national reporting format. Okay. Now, this is information that you can put in if there's an associated agency that they've gone to, Salvation Army, etc. You can fill that in, or you can skip it.
No, many times we work with other agencies, so they could have gotten partial help from one agency and partial
right.
Conference.
Right. Now, what I've done here is I'm going to proceed to the last step of actually submitting or assigning the case, and I can see that the conference is here, the case number is here, the client is here. It's all ready to roll. So I press next. I'm finishing my workflow. I say, submit this case to the caseworker assignment. I say yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a caseworker and I'm doing intake, I can elect to accept this case for myself. Okay? If I want to send it to another caseworker, like the person that you said was doing intake, they can pick from the case team that week and assign the two people. Okay?
Excellent.
And each of those two people will be given their email notification that they got a case assignment. I'm going to go ahead and elect to, if I press done here, mm-hmm. then it sends the case to a shared case list where caseworkers can look at a shared case list and pick the case that they want. Some conferences operate like that. They do the intake, they send all the cases to an open case list, and it's a first come, first serve. Other conferences use a case manager. So they will actually select a case manager to send the case to. There are half a dozen configurations you can have for your conference. Sure. Also remember, for the purposes that you may or may not need, past assistance is always going to be there. It goes as an accordion and it follows this workflow.
And
all right?
Past assistance is by client?
The past assistance is by client.
Okay, right, which is what you want. That's very good.
Okay.
Very good, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to accept this. I'm doing the case myself. I'm going to accept it again. I could assign it, or I could just send it to a shared case list. I have three options.
If you don't accept it, for example, if somebody calls in that is really outside our boundaries, but you want to make a note of it, this call came in from such and such a person, but they were outside our boundaries, and it falls into Mary Immaculate's, for example, conference.
You wouldn't get it to this point of assignment. You would refer them to the other conference, and you would close this intake down before it gets to.
Could you capture that status?
Yes, you can. If you can accept it, the status you're referring to is capture the fact that somebody solicited you for assistance. You wanted to log the fact that they did.
Uh-huh.
Okay. If you do not provide the assistance, you have to create the case and then assign the case to the other conference. What conferences do typically is they close the inquiry process and they have the other conference take the case.
Okay.
And what they do is they assign this case to themselves and they close it, assistance not provided, and they put a little note in it that, yeah, this case we did the intake, but we had to refer them.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm just trying to think of when a call first comes in, that if you have a case where right away you identify this by the address that they left on the hotline, this is outside our boundaries, you still want to have a record of that call came in because we're trying to keep a record of how many calls are coming in. But you also want to be saying, okay, we didn't handle it, it was assigned. This part of more of a log than part of a case?
This we don't keep a log of the inquiries or the case intake.
Okay.
It's too much data entry to dedicate. The design assumption is that this is going to be a case.
Okay.
That we're taking it. So you can keep an outside log if you want of your call volume and just note it.
Okay.
Let me accept this, and I'll show you what it looks like. Assign this case to yourself? Yes. Then it gives me the case. So I'm ready to proceed with the case. I can use the
caseworker at this point.
Yeah. Let's take a look at that. So I'll shorten this down.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I look at as a caseworker when I get a case assigned to me. I'm going to see the client. I'm going to see the request details that the intake person sent me. See that? Food, remember the house is in disrepair?
Uh-huh.
And the past assistance.
That's good.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me show you what this looks like if I didn't self-assign it. I would be getting a message. I'd get an email message as well. And it would be...
So the message to the case, say you assign it to somebody else other than yourself, that email would be automatically generated when you assign it. At the point that you assign it, it will issue that email message to that caseworker?
That's correct.
Automatically. Okay, that's good.
And I log in, and it would show me the message right here. I could open that case that I just saw by clicking on the message, and the case would also be in my assigned cases, my work list. And let's go look at, see, there's Workflow John.
Let me ask you another question. At the point that that message to the caseworker is issued, would that caseworker have that email on their particular email? So they would say they're not on CMS. They just would get an email that, hey, I have a case now. I have to get into CMS to look at what this case is.
That's correct. It will tell them, and it'll give them a little link. So you get messages two ways. You get a message in your CMS work list,
Uh-huh.
Okay? You get it right here.
Right.
And you can click on it. You can click on it to get to the case. You're also going to get an email notification that you were assigned the case. And when
you have to get when you get your email, then you're not on CMS. You have to go into CMS to actually see the.
That's right. That's right. It'll give you a little bit of a message, a little bit of the email details.
Yeah, that's fine.
Of what's going on. And then when you get a case assigned to you, it's going to look like this.
Okay.